What if I told you America used to have something, but it lost it? Something that made communities strong, families close, and people genuinely happy. And I didn't actually realize that America had lost it until I moved to the Philippines. And I saw it still doing alive and well here. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So stick with me until the end, and I'll show you what I mean. Hey there, welcome back. Rick Wright here, and welcome back to my channel, Mr. Wright in the Philippines. Today I want to talk about something that I've been thinking a lot about since I moved here. The Philippines has something that the United States used to have, but they lost it somewhere along the way. And I'm not talking about, technology or infrastructure or anything like that. I'm talking about something that's much deeper, something that affects everyday life, everyday happiness, your mental health, and your overall quality of life. And living here has made me realize that America didn't just change, it actually lost something really valuable. And in this video, I'm going to break down what the Philippines still has that America lost. And just to be clear, I love my country. I'm not trying to bash my country, I'm not complaining. But I have a responsibility to speak the truth, and it actually breaks my heart to see things the way they are going right now. But before we get started, quick note before we dive right in. If you're new here, I share honest stories about, leaving the U.S. and building a life here in the Philippines. And, if that's something that resonates with you and that you enjoy, then, please hit that subscribe button. I post new videos every couple of days. And I also want to give a very special thank you to all my super fans for all your contributions. And if you enjoy this video as well, then you can show your appreciation by hitting that thanks button and donating as well. It really does help me, to continue to be able to create valuable content like this for you and be able to come live to you in videos like this. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing that I see that America has lost is real community. Now, let me try to paint you a picture of what community looks like in the Philippines. Here, when you walk down the street in a Filipino neighborhood, everybody knows each other. There's people sitting outside their homes. People are just sitting there talking to neighbors. Kids are in the street playing together and just enjoying themselves. There's always somebody cooking some kind of food or grilling, and they're going to invite you to eat. If you need help, someone helps you, no questions asked. And if your car happens to break down, 3 neighbors show up to help you push it. And I've actually had that experience. If you're sick, someone brings you food. If there's a problem, the community actually comes together to help you solve it. This is called Bayanihan, so forgive my pronunciation, which basically means the Filipino spirit of communal unity and cooperation. And it's not just a concept. This is lived every day in normal everyday life. Now, you compare that to America, in the U.S., most people don't even know their neighbors. And I know that for a fact because I lived next door to someone for years and had no idea who they were, and much less a meaningful, real conversation. In the U.S., everyone is isolated in their own house, in their own little bubbles. Front doors are closed, garages, close automatically just so you don't even have to interact with someone, when you come or go. There's no front porch culture. There's no one sitting outside and talking to other people, when you walk by. And when I was a kid, I remember, having cookouts with the neighbors, and, the women were sitting around the table gossiping, the men were drinking beer and playing horseshoes, and, the kids, we were all just playing in the pool, having a good time. Community doesn't exist in most American neighborhoods anymore. And I know that's subjective, and there are some small towns that still have it, but overall they don't. And it's not just the neighborhoods, it's everywhere. People don't talk to strangers. And here in the Philippines, you can't walk down the street. If you see a Filipino, they're gonna say hello. Everyone's on their phone, everyone's busy, everyone's isolated in the US, and we've traded community for privacy. And yes, privacy is nice to an extent, but the cost has been loneliness, isolation, and disconnection. The U.S. used to have this. You go back 50, 60, 70 years when I was a kid, American communities were strong. People, they knew who their neighbors were. They went and borrowed sugar or a cup of milk. They watched each other's kids. They actually helped each other. But somewhere along the way, we lost it. We got richer, sure. We got more individualistic, but we prioritize independence over interdependence, and now we're lonely. The Philippines still has these things. It has what the U.S. has lost: real connection, real community, real interdependence. And living here, experiencing that every day, it's really shown me how isolated American life has become. So the second thing that I see that the U.S. has lost is family being at the center of life. In the Philippines, family is everything. Multi-generational homes are common. Grandparents, parents, kids, sometimes even aunts and uncles, it's not unusual for them all to be living together, or at least very close by. And Sunday is family day. It's not maybe, not if it's convenient or if you have time. Every Sunday, families get together and usually have dinner or some kind of, barbecue or party or something. And it's not just immediate family either. It's extended family, it's cousins, it's second cousins. It could be, neighbors, friends, godparents, everyone. And here, elders are respected and cared for. You don't send your parents to a nursing home when they get old here. You actually take care of them. They actually live with you. And, here, family decisions are made together. Especially big purchases or life changes, career moves. Family is consulted and involved, and their opinions count. Now, yes, this can be overbearing a little bit, especially if you're used to, American independence. But, here's the trade-off. No one is alone. No one is ever abandoned, and no one is isolated. There's always family. And yes, I know you've heard the stories. There are a lot of young single moms here. But what I've seen sometimes is a lot of them, they will move to the city and rent a small room just so that they can work and send some money back to the family while the parents are actually watching the kids. And then she comes home on her days off or on the weekend whenever she can. Now, you compare that to the U.S., and American culture prioritizes independence above all else. Kids, they grow up, they turn 18, and they move out. If you're lucky, they go to college. But they're on their own. Families are scattered across the country, and, parents in one state, kids in another, siblings everywhere, and you see each other maybe once or twice a year. And I remember, even at one point, my oldest daughter lived in Atlanta. My youngest daughter got married, and my brother lives in Virginia. You see each other at Christmas, and the elders, we put them in nursing homes. We visit them occasionally, but they're isolated, they're lonely, and sometimes they're often forgotten. The family unit is fragmented, and America used to be different. Multi-generational homes, they used to be normal. Families used to live close by, and it wasn't uncommon for your parents to live across the street from you. Grandparents actually helped raise your grandkids. My grandfather lived with us and helped raise us while my parents went to work, and everyone supported each other. But, we traded that away for independence and, our careers and career mobility. And yes, there's some value in independence. I get it. But the cost has been the complete breakdown of the overall family structure. And the Philippines still has that. Family is the foundation of life here. Elders are respected and cared for. And nobody is ever abandoned or alone. And, watching, Filipino families, how they care for each other, how they actually show up for each other, it's just reminded me of what, family is supposed to be. And it's what it used to be like. It's what, my childhood was like. Okay, so the third thing that the U.S. has lost is presence over productivity. In the Philippines, life is not about grinding and hustling. Yes, Filipinos work hard, very hard, but work is not their identity. It's not the center of their world. Life is about being, not just doing. People actually take their time to eat slowly. They talk with friends. Sometimes they just sit and enjoy the moment, enjoy each other's company. There's no guilt about wasting time. Sitting outside, chatting with neighbors for an hour, sure, not a problem. They don't consider that wasted time. That's living. And relaxing is not seen as lazy here. It's seen as something that's necessary. Now, you compare that to the US, and American culture worships productivity. Your worth is determined by how hard you work, how much you produce, how busy you are, how much you achieve, and how many toys you have. If you're not grinding, you're failing. And taking the time to relax, that's considered lazy sometimes. And sitting around talking to friends for an hour, people don't do that. They just don't take time for that. And that's considered wasting time. And you should be out working and hustling and achieving instead. And unfortunately, it's destroying us. Americans are burnt out. They're anxious, they're depressed, they're less healthy. And yes, sure, we're the richest country in the world, but we're absolutely miserable. The United States used to be different. You go back a few generations. Hell, you don't even have to go back that far. I just go back to my childhood, and life was slower. Yeah, sure, people worked, but they also took time to just be. Sundays were for rest and for family, and evenings were for family get-togethers. And my family ate dinner together every night. Meals were slow and social, and there was still space in life. But then somewhere along the line, we became obsessed with productivity and efficiency and the hustle culture. And now we can't stop. We can't slow down. We've just forgotten how to just be. The Philippines still has that. They have presence. They have this unique ability to slow down and to actually be in the moment, and they don't feel guilty about it. And living here has taught me that. It's taught me that life is not about how much you achieve. It's about how much you experience. It's what reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from the movie Hitch. Actually, it's life is not about the number of breaths that you take. It's about the moments that take your breath away. And, the Philippines still remembers that. And somehow and somewhere along the line, the U.S. forgot. So the fourth thing that the U.S. has lost is the joy and simplicity. Filipinos have this ability to find joy in simple little things. Just having a meal with family, a neighbor stopping by to say hello, a birthday party, and maybe if there's only cheap food, but there's lots of laughter. Here, happiness is not tied to stuff. It's tied to people and experiences. And here you see it everywhere. You can look and see the kids, playing with homemade toys, laughing hysterically, having a good time. You can see families celebrating with, simple food, but, they're happy with huge smiles. You can see, friends gathering with nothing but just each other's company, and they're happy, genuinely, deeply happy. Now, you compare that to the U.S. and, Americans are, they're caught up in their own lives and they're basically consumers. Happiness is sold as a product. You need the newest iPhone, you need the bigger house, you need the nicer car, you need the designer clothes. You're never satisfied because there's always something new to want, and you have to work hard to be able to get the money to have that new thing. You have Black Friday, you have Cyber Monday, there's constant sales and constant marketing, constantly wanting, and yet we're still miserable. Yeah, sure, we have more than any generation in history, but we're less happy than ever, and America used to find joy in simple things. Like I said, as a kid, our family would just go for Sunday drives. We'd have dinners together. I remember sitting on the front porch just talking to my grandfather or talking to friends. But we got rich and we forgot how to be happy. Somewhere along the line, we confused consumption with contentment. And, the Philippines still has that. They still know, and they have the ability to find joy in simplicity. They have this ability to be grateful for what they have and not constantly stressing about wanting more. And living here it's just reminded me that you don't need that much to be happy. You just need enough, and you need to be surrounded by the right people. So The fifth thing that the U.S. has lost, I see, is faith and shared values being at the center of life. In the Philippines, faith is everywhere. It's not just something you do on Sunday when you go to church. This is actually woven into their everyday life. People actually pray before meals. They reference God in just casual conversations. They trust in something bigger than themselves, and it actually gives life meaning. There's a shared moral framework here. Right and wrong aren't just relative. Family, respect, kindness, generosity, these things are actually valued. And it's not perfect. Filipinos aren't saints. There's bad apples in every crowd in the world. But there's at the core is a shared understanding of what really matters. Now, you compare that to the U.S. and America's lost its shared values. We can't agree on what's right and what's wrong. Hell, we can't agree on anything these days. Look at how divided the country is. Religion has declined. Churches are practically empty. And fewer people believe in something greater than themselves. And without shared values, society it fractures. It can't sustain and stay together. Everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes, without regard for anybody else. And there's no common ground. The U.S. used to have at least a core shared values. Faith was central. Community standards existed, and there was at least a shared moral framework. You didn't have to be religious, but at least there was some agreement on basic values, basic human rights. But we've lost that, and with it, we've also lost cohesion, as a community and as a country. The Philippines still has that, they still have shared faith and values that actually create social cohesion and gives life meaning. I'm not saying you have to be religious. I'm not religious at all. I'm very spiritual, and I have my own relationship with God or the universe or whatever you call your higher power. But when society shares core values, life is so much easier. There's so much less strife and conflict. There's more unity. And the U.S. has lost that. The Philippines still has it. So here's what I realized living here in the Philippines. The U.S. didn't just change. America lost something. Yeah, sure, we gained wealth, we gained technology, we gained convenience and, and efficiency, but we lost some things that are very important, like community and connection, strong family bonds. We lost presence over productivity. We lost our joy in simplicity and in simple things, and we lost shared faith and values. And honestly, we're suffering because of it. Yeah, sure, Americans are richer than ever, and they're also more anxious, more depressed, more lonely, more isolated, and less healthy than ever. And because we traded meaning for money. The Philippines isn't perfect, Yeah, sure, it's got poverty, it's got corruption, it's got infrastructure issues, there's many problems here as well. But it still has something that the U.S. desperately needs, the things that actually make life worth living. They still have community, they still have family, they still have presence, they still have joy, and they still have faith. And those things don't show up on a GDP chart or on some financial report, but they show up in the people's happiness. And I see it every day. And here's the tragedy. The U.S. used to have these things. We didn't import them from the Philippines, and the Philippines didn't steal them from the U.S. We had them. And somewhere along the line, we lost them. Now, I don't know, can America get them back? I have no idea, but on the it doesn't look like it, the way they're headed now, but I wasn't going to wait around and find out, because the Philippines still has those things that the U.S. has lost. And I'd rather live here and have less stuff and be happy than live in the U.S. with more and be miserable, because that's what my life was like. I had stuff. I had the nice car, the nice house. I had the great job, but I was stressed and I was unhappy. Well, there you have it. That's the list of what I see that America has lost that the Philippines still has. And again, I love my country. country. I'm not trying to bash my country, but I have an obligation and a responsibility to speak the truth, and it actually does break my heart to see things that way. But unfortunately, it's the world we live in now. And it's not about one country being better than the other. It's just my perspective about what we value, and I see that America stopped valuing the things that actually really matter in life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think America can get these things back, or have they gone too far? Did I miss any? Is there any that you think that I should put on the list? Drop a comment. And again, if you're new here, subscribe, because as you can see, I share honest reflections on American culture, Filipino culture, and what it's like and what it means to choose a different life. So again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Salamat!